Hey everybody, this is the Airstream Flying Cloud upgrade that I did. It's made out of an ash wood and oh, it feels amazing. The grain looks awesome. I'll show you how we get here in this video. Just keep watching. This particular piece is a cooktop, basically creating more counter space. Client's a little iffy on the size, so we may end up changing this in the future. Here's the sink cover. And we also have the table. Now I've coated all of these in a hot wax solution, which you'll see in the video, and they all feel buttery smooth. Oh, and yes, the pedestal. This is the nice piece. I also created a mechanism to where it slides forward. This way it doesn't hit the wall as it's trying to go down. But as always, if you enjoy this, hit like and subscribe. It'll help me to get more videos out there for others. If you want to see how this is all done, just keep watching this video. Thank you. For added stability, I may end up using these corner brackets from the factory for the original table. We'll see how it all turns out. We start by cutting out any defects like cracks, and this particular piece I'm going in small sections so I can see how far the crack goes. That way I don't use that in anything important later. So there are numerous ways to joint boards together if you don't have a jointer. This particular method, you put two boards side by side, screw two screws into each piece at each end, and I mark the center point of the two boards. That's where my blade is going to be cutting across. And what this does is it creates an opposing cut, so if your blade is slightly off in angle, each side will match up to its counterpart. And I'll go through a series of doing this on each board, matching it up to the next board that will be next to it. You see, you just slide it through, remove the screws afterward. You see here's the end blocks that I've removed, and these boards match up nicely. Take a look. Now I've gone ahead and laid out all the boards on the floor and created a line for the end cuts, as well as where I'm going to be placing dowels right here. Well, close to here. These will be the starting point for my little doweling jig. That way I know I can get everything lined up and set it up just like this. Get myself tightened in on the jig, making sure that everything still looks centered, and every time I go to drill a hole for that jig, I try to make sure it's exactly the same on each line. There are other ways to do it, and I'll show you another one. Here's another way that you could do dowels. These are doweling pins, doweling markers, whatever you want to call it. Drill your holes on one board, then go ahead and line them up with the opposing board. And I'd like to take another board and place it on top of any high spot that I might find. Put some pressure on it, that way it keeps the board down and more in line with the opposing board. Push the boards together and you'll get a little mark where these little pins have touched, just like that. And that's where you're going to drill your next hole for the dowel. After I've done all this, I like to dry fit the pieces together just to make sure that they're going to line up correctly. It'll save you a little headache later. If you start trying to glue this thing up and realize something's not lined up right, you're going to hate it. Trust me. Go ahead and throw some glue on these boards that you're joining together. I know everybody does this a little bit differently. I like to place the dowels in with some glue first onto one board. Then I go over everything with more glue. You can brush it in, you can rub it in with your finger, whatever you need to do to get the glue on both sides evenly. This way you can have a nice glue up and get some squeeze out at the same time. I went ahead and glued up 3 boards at a time, placing a 35-pound weight with some wood on top of it. I've also got a piece of plastic underneath the wood so it doesn't stick to the other wood that's already there. Then I went and joined all the pieces together and placed that weight on there, some clamps, and scrape off the excess glue once it's almost fully cured. It's a little bit easier to do it this way rather than letting it dry completely and having to fight with the hardness of the glue. Now comes the many hours of sanding. Try to keep it very directional, following the grain, and basically go back and forth, trying not to stay in one spot for too long, otherwise you will change the depth in that area. You're trying to achieve flat seams between the boards while creating a nice uniform finish all the way across. You're going to be doing a lot of sanding. I ended up burning out this Ryobi. Unfortunately, that's part of woodworking sometimes. You get tools that don't last. I ended up going to the disc right there, 240 grit, just to soften up all the 120 grit from the belt sander. And then I end up going to a 320 grit. And you can tell there's a lot of sanding involved, but that's how you get it smooth. Here I'm going to be trimming off the edges. The good face is on the downside, or the bottom, and the blade on this circular saw is pulling upward, so this way anything that could tear out will happen on the underside of the tabletop. I've got the level clamped down to the board, and I've got my distance measured from the level outward to the line where I need to cut. Both sides turned out really nice, but you know what does not look nice? Me working in the garage in my pajamas. My Christmas pajamas. Hey, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. Here I'm making a rounded corner template for the router, and what I'll end up doing is clamping this down to the tabletop, placing it on the underside, and I'll use this spiral trim bit with the bearing on the end. That bearing will touch the template and give it a path to follow. Anytime you're doing routing, always keep in mind the directionality of your router and try to do it in small passes so that way you don't take off too much or cause a problem by ripping out part of the wood. If you don't have a router, you can do it on the table saw. Just draw your corner, cut off the excess. You will have to do a bit of sanding with your belt sander. Make sure you don't stay in one place too long. You want to make that thing flow around each corner, and it'll create a nice transition. I go back over all the corners and edges with 240 grit. It creates a nice soft touch when somebody's rubbing their hand over it. They'll appreciate it. Then I go over everything with the Varathane wood stain, and basically I rub it in and then go back and start wiping it off. They say you can leave it on for up to 2 minutes to absorb. However, I find that sometimes it leaves a bit of streaking, so I start wiping it back up pretty quick. Then I go over all of this with a block sander to get off the high spots. It creates a nice finish. Right here is one iteration of how I was going to create the tabletop mechanism. This happens to be a car seat slider. Didn't work out because the handle doesn't pull in the right direction. So now I've created a drawer slide mechanism. Make sure you get your spacing right in between each one. It'll help to make sure that they are all parallel. Mark your holes for drilling. Make sure everything's straight. And then what I'll do is end up setting one side first with a screw, making sure that I can realign the other end and keep it in the center point and parallel to each other. I'm going to end up taking out all these removable portions. This way I can get them positioned on the underside of the table and match them up to their counterpart, which will be on the pedestal. Make sure you pre-drill every hole and measure the depth of your tabletop and your screws, so that way nothing pierces through the top side of the table. You can always use painter's tape, like I did here, to mark the depth of your drilling. This way you don't damage the tabletop. These are 22-inch drawer slides, and I'm going to minimize the travel distance by securing a screw in from the top of one of the layers going into the second layer. You have 3 pieces that they slide across, so I'm only going to have about 8 inches of travel once I do this. So these are the brackets I'm creating for the underside of the table to create some stability. I pre-drilled with the small bit the size of the screw that will fit through there, and to create my bevel for the screw head to fit into, I'm just using a larger drill bit. I know they have special bevel bits that you can use. This seems to work for me. And then there's a few pieces I've created. I've created a longer bar as well, which will go across the full piece, and you'll see that there to the right. Get my pedestal in line, match up my screw to my drill bit. Again, always marking and pre-drilling before you do any kind of work, and also the depth. You don't want to damage anything on your parts. And now for the finish. I've got a heat gun. You can use a blow dryer, and this is my hot wax solution. I've melted some beeswax, some carnauba wax, and some fractionated coconut oil, and basically I'm going to heat this all up as I'm rubbing it in. It helps to ensure that all the fibers get soaked in this nice hot wax solution. Come back afterward and start buffing, and more buffing until this thing feels really soft. I have since placed in the parts that are able to be placed in, and here is the nightstand. I've just got it setting on top until I get it mounted. And then here is the table that's now missing, and here's the new one that's going to go in its place. I recommend installing this pedestal as center as possible compared to this side and this side. Also using a reference point of that screw, which looks very centered. And if not, take some measurements so that you get it right. There it is, most of the way installed. I've still got to put the base screws in there. And in case you weren't aware, most of the Airstreams have about a 5/8 inch plywood subfloor. So you want to take that into consideration when you're buying your screws and drilling your holes. Now this particular pedestal has about a 3/8 inch hole all the way around, and it does have a taper, so you want to find yourself some nice big screws that will dig in, and always drill the holes prior slightly smaller than the screw thickness, so that way you don't crack things and you don't over drill your hole. This particular nightstand, you've got two USB plug-ins, one on each side. Make sure you tape those ends as you're taking them off, just as a precaution, so nothing shorts out. And I'll show you from the upside down position. I've removed the USB ports. Basically they have a cover that goes on the outside, and this piece slides in like so. You're going to undo the screws here, one basically at each corner, and they decided to throw a couple of staples, one at each corner as well. So when you're redoing the new top, you'll clip off those staples, and this piece you're going to pry up, and I would recommend doing some pre-drilled holes, maybe 3 or 2, whatever feels good. Go ahead and remove this piece so that you can get it started onto the new top. When you're putting your new top on, the back of the original needs to line up with the back of the new piece on both sides, preferably. Otherwise you're going to be crooked. And you want to take some measurements, make sure that it's equal here, as well as here, as well as there. I've got the top on. I'm going to make note here, these screws were screwed in at an angle, so when you're pre-drilling your hole, follow the same path, take the screw out, and then take your drill bit, which could be difficult because of the shortness here. Might need an extension, but follow the same angle of the hole that was pre-drilled from the factory. That way all your holes match up and at the right angle, and then you won't have to deal with splitting your top. So there it is mounted, and I pulled out the undermount drawer slides. I'm going to position this back onto there, make sure I'm in the right spot, basically lock them into place from underneath, like so, like that, if you can see it. Let me get some light on there for you. So they lock into that orange mechanism, one on each side, and then we're done. So here it is, all finished. Look at that beautiful grain. Feels smooth like butter. This piece we trimmed down. My client still is a little iffy on the size, so we're going to talk about that later. Here is the sink cover. Buttery smooth, just like everything else. There is the finished tabletop with the pedestal, fully mounted. I'm putting about 10 pounds of pressure. It has a little bit of movement. I'd say about a ½ inch, quarter inch roughly. But if needed, I can always put another bracket going from the underside, just like the original table, to help keep it stable on both corners. We'll see how it turns out.